and welcome to this webinar. It's an insight of a product manager at Volvo Cars. And before we start, this is obviously in English. I hope you understand that. But I just want to introduce that it's we from Biner that are hosting this webinar. And Biner, if you don't know, we are Gothenburg-centered, and we work with consulting, and it's like product manager, project manager, business analyst, and also, of course, agile way of working. That's close to my heart, and we do that. And on top of that, we have also education in Biner Academy, where we do agile and safe education, as well as business analysis courses. So we have done quite a few webinars in the past, and we'll do more coming up this spring and later on. So that is a little bit about Biner, but we're not here to talk about Biner. We're here to talk about you, Philip, and your role. So if you just could try to introduce yourself a little bit first. Who are you?
Certainly. Yeah. Philip King, Englishman. Been living in Sweden for the last almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
A lot of time been spent at Volvo Cars, both as a consultant and the last 7 years as an employee, mainly around business analysis, product management, and program management. So I've seen the transformation between Volvo being owned by Ford to now being owned by Geely, and the transformation there, and then again the transformation we've gone through from being a kind of a specification waterfall company based into now moving towards a much more agile approach to development practices.
Yeah, and that is what we're going to dig into. But before we do that, short about me, I'm going to facilitate this, and I'm Jesper Gunnarson, and I'm working here at Biner for almost 10 years right now. And I'm a senior Agile Coach, working with Agile Transformation and helping organizations to become agile. That is what I do and like to do. And I also want to talk a little about the format here. We had an idea to have a conversation about Volvo Cars and the agile journey there, and your role as a product manager, and what you have learned and what kind of insights you have had. And then I will chip in along the way. It's going to be a kind of an interview with some comments from my side. And it's also possible to ask questions. So we have a chat function where you can ask questions, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end. However, it's possible to ask questions along the way, and we'll pick maybe some of them up if we can. So no promises there, but we'll see. There'll be a Q&A in the end at least. So that is the format. And that implies that we do not have any presentations. So we're just going to talk. That's going to be awesome, I think. But we are going to record this for those of you who want to see it again, or you want to share it with someone else if you think it's good. So hopefully you will enjoy this. So first up, I want to talk on general of a VCC Agile Transformation using SAFe. And I just want to mention that, of course, we're going to talk a lot about Agile and SAFe and increments and stuff. And we're not going to explain all of those wordings. So hopefully you know a little bit of SAFe and the Agile words. But SAFe is, of course, a scaled Agile framework that is used by organizations to scale Agile way of working up. So hopefully you know a little bit of that, but we're going to talk about it. And yeah, the question was, so how long has it been ongoing?
It's been ongoing in certain enclaves, like where I've been working for kind of 4.5, 5 years now. And then from some areas, it's just fundamentally a year old.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different levels of maturity around the organization, depending whether you're in a traditional software development area or if you're in a more correlated the development process. So it's it's been going on for a while, but essentially there was a large internal reorganization at the beginning of October, and that aligned a lot of the areas and departments to facilitate working in a more scaled agile framework.
Okay. So is it the full company? Is it the whole of Volvo Cars, or is it just certain part that are working in this?
No, it's now pretty much the entire company is working in some form of
So even the manufacturing part?
Yeah, I can't speak too much for some of the manufacturing areas or some of the areas, but essentially with the whole of R&D, essentially research and design is now working within scale framework. So everyone's working with the same cadence of PI increments and the same PI plannings and working on the same Vera boards. So there's a lot of alignment there, and that's a lot of people, multiple thousands of people.
So if we try to translate that to maybe if you know a number of teams, or maybe it's something called the Agile Release Trains. Do you know roughly how many?
We have, I can't remember how many solutions we have now, 7 maybe solutions, and then we're in one solution which has kind of 7 arts maybe, and then each art has between 6 to 10 teams.
6 to 10.
So you're talking a lot of people there too.
Yeah, a lot of people. So we're going to do some maths there, but an art is like 125 people.
It can be after that, yeah.
And then you work in something. We have 6 arts. And then that's a solution. Then that's a large solution. And then that is like 800 people. But how many large solutions do you think it is?
That's a good question. You've got Connex and SCA and a few others. So you're thinking of 4 or 5, I guess.
4 or 5. And on top of that, you have a portfolio.
The portfolio is starting to come into life. And again, these things are taking their time to mature and to realize into kind of functioning businesses where we actually have kind of, we follow the SAFe framework. We had the Volvo implementation of that. And we're starting to see now a lot of this, I said, with the reorganization happening last year, we're now starting to see that alignment towards working in the desired way.
Exactly. Okay. So I was on something called the SAFe Summit a couple of years ago, and then there was a presentation about the Volvo Cars implementation. And at that time, they said it was the biggest implementation in Europe, at least. So, so it's big. It's big. So, and that is interesting. A big company. How does it really work? That is, the core question there. So, as before we move into that question, yes, you're working in increments, right? So they are 12 weeks long.
Yeah, we've got 12-week increments. We split up into 5 2-week sprints, and then 1 2-week sprint, which is for innovation planning. So innovation and the planning sprints. So they're the classic SAFe way of doing it.
And then you have a cadence. This is happening on a cadence.
Yep. So this happens sort of 4 times a year, effectively. So there's 4 increments within.
Yeah. And the whole company applies to the same cadence?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we're doing that, which is one of the benefits that we're seeing.
Yeah. So everyone is doing it at the same time. That's really cool, I think. But if I ask this question, how you said that you come from a specification type company, and then you do this transformation that have been ongoing for a while, a couple of years, or 4 or 5 years. But how agile are you really? What do you say?
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
We're saying a lot better than we are, and it depends how you define agile and what better is, I guess. I mean, there's classic software development. We have experienced consultants in, and we have new staff that have always worked in an agile way. So they're working on a Kanban with a kind of a WIP limit, and they're looking at scale, and so they're looking at SAFe and thinking, well, that's not really agile because you've still got some framework around that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got people that have never worked in an agile environment, and then are looking at this and they go, well, where am I gate processes in order to meet quality standards and stuff. So we've got this kind of two extremes, if you like.
Yeah.
People that have always worked agile are coming into this environment, and the people that have never worked. So it's, as I said before, we've been in this for 4 years, 5 years in our area, and we've got a level of maturity that's pretty good. Other areas are building up to that.
Obviously, yeah, okay, but it's it's progressing, I guess. So, but it is sometimes in organization you do a transformation. At some stage we say, okay, now we're transformed. Now we try to improve and sustain. So you're in the improvement.
I definitely think we've transformed and we're in the improvement stages now. I think what we're seeing is a lot greater visibility when it comes to backlogs, a lot greater visibility and understanding when it comes to shifting items and prioritizing work, which is one of the things that I think the Agile mindset gives you, is you start to understand the impact and the consequence of changing your plans. Cool. So I want to ask you, there must have been some challenges along the way. So I guess that's obviously, but the cars and working with cars, they have deadlines, and maybe there are fixed requirements, fixed cost, and so on. And you try to be agile in that environment. So how do you cope with that? No, I mean that's a challenge. Essentially, you have a product that's in many countries certified for a model year, and then you release that car or that vehicle, that truck, or that bus, or whatever, and that's certified for a year, and that comes in at a price point, and that comes in with essentially fixed content, and you've already decided when the release date is. So all those things together, none of those are agile. We're not doing shadow releases. And we're not adjusting price, and we're not adjusting the content.
No.
So all those things are kind of anti-agile, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge in itself to still meet the fixed standards that are required to release a product, but have an agile way of working in order to get there.
So do you have any mechanism, like delivering a car model first with some certain specification, and then later on there comes more variants? Or is
we're seeing the beginning now of OTA. We've had over-the-air updates released to the new XC40 BEV, and the Polestar 2 car have had OTA releases in the last few weeks, actually. So we're starting to add functionality, but again, that's really functionality. That's not functions that are affecting the certification of the car. So you still have to have a base car to release, and then you can build functionality, and that itself is, I think, where a lot of these organizations are going, automotive organizations are going in general, is to have a base car, then build on functionality.
I see. So you have over-the-air updates.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can improve you for a long way. Cool. So sometimes when I work and do an Agile transformation, you introduce quite a lot of events or ceremonies, like the Scrum events, the sprint planning, daily stand-ups, it's retrospectives, and so on. And sometimes it's, I get told, but when are we going to work, Jesper? All these meetings. So obviously you got these meetings got to count. They are work meetings, of course. But so I wanted to hear a little bit about those meetings in contrast to, any other for us or reporting for us. So how do you?
Yeah, I mean that's a classic argument we get. If we take software development as a whole, then developers want to develop. They don't want to necessarily sit in meetings. So we try to restrict those ceremonies being as few as possible, but still you have the fundamental ones where we want to have for instance, we have a Scrum of Scrums for the teams in my area. When I meet them once a week, and we just go through the program board, and we say, okay, well, where are we against the plan? Are we doing do we have any stoppers? Do we need to raise anything? How can I as a leader kind of remove impediments to move things forwards. Then we have iteration reviews after every 2 weeks where the teams have the opportunity to demo. Now, if you look at Agile in a pure Agile sense, then you should demo something whenever you want feedback from a customer. You shouldn't necessarily wait for every 2 weeks to do something. But because we're doing this within a group of teams in an art, and some of the teams have connections to other teams, some of the teams are working independently, then I think it's good to try and get some common level of understanding about what the entire art is doing. So we have demos every couple of weeks. And then we have obviously the PI planning every 12 weeks.
So I'll come back to the PI planning as a few. Okay, so this was a little bit about the status of a general transformation.
Yeah.
So I want to dig in a little bit to both where you work right now and your role as a product manager. So you work at something called Vehicle Data and Diagnostics Platform.
Yes, that's right.
And what is that?
That's essentially, I guess, the elevator pitch is if you want data from the car, then come and speak to us. So we're responsible for kind of requesting data from the car, scheduling when that data is collected, pushing that data back up to the cloud effectively or to workshop tools, and then making that data available to the end users, being that a software engineer or an engineer within R&D to improve a function or to an end user perhaps. And that can be streaming software, so real-time information on the car's position. That can be information on the drive cycle, so what happened when in that drive cycle. Or that could happen at the end of a week or the end of the month or scheduled before a service to pre-warn the workshop what may need to be done on the car.
Okay, cool. And you have a role as product manager.
Yes.
So what do you do? So let's think about different time scales here. So you frame it a little bit. So if we start on the shorter, the iteration of a sprint, the 2 weeks iteration that the team is involved. As a product manager, do you have any connection to that type of work, or
other than the Scrum of Scrums, then I have very little direct input onto the sprint planning itself and what the teams do within that sprint, apart from trying to erase blockers for them. My time span is much more along the lines of the actual increment itself, or 2 or 3 increments ahead of that.
So I reckon that. So you look at the bigger time box, the increment, which says it's 12 weeks, and so I guess, and then of course longer, and then we talk about roadmaps, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
So a little bit, so not so much in the sprint, but the execution of the increment is one part. That, okay, you do the PI planning, you plan the increment, and then you try to execute it. As a product manager, how much are you involved in your role to see that, okay, this is really happening, or are you in there, or are you?
Yeah, I'd say that hopefully quite a bit, and it really depends on what comes up. I mean, if you have an increment where you get no requirements coming in from the side, and you get no emergency request to do things, and all the dependencies are in place, then in theory my job's relatively calm. But that's never really the case. Surprisingly enough.
Really?
No. There's always something that comes inside. There's always a stakeholder that needs something done now. There's always a dependency that doesn't work, or a delivery that hasn't come. So you're always looking at, okay, well, how can we make the best of this situation? Can we reprioritize something? Yeah. Okay.
That's your job.
That's really my job there. Yeah. So it's much more if something goes wrong.
So then I understand that you most of your time is planning ahead.
Yes.
Right. And in Safe and Agile, we're using time boxes, and increments is the time box that you work with. So there's got to be quite a lot preparing for a PI planning. So are you working, we mentioned roadmaps, but then you need a set of maybe epics and features that goes into that. Could you talk about a little bit your work in
I mean, so our roadmap is kind of dictated to by which cars we're being released, and then fundamentally what platform that car is being built upon. If there's a new platform that car is being built upon, then clearly we've had a lot more work than if it's what refers to as a top hat, so just a new top onto an existing platform, because then a lot of our work from the cloud perspective, from the systems in the car, is what refers to as carryover. So it's fundamentally the same. Other arts will have huge amounts of rework. If it's a 3-door car or a hatchback, then the doors and chassis will have a huge amount of work, whereas we don't have so much in that scenario. Whereas if we have a new platform, then we have a huge amount of work.
So in the platform, there's a lot of software.
As well as software, there's a lot of new physical hardware components that we want to have diagnostic data from.
Okay.
So we need to make sure those components themselves are actually able to give us information.
So in your job, it's like much preparation for upcoming increments and see what is prioritized. And I guess, of course, talking to stakeholders. And is it a lot of synchronization in between other arts that you're dependent on, or how is that?
There's a lot of dependencies to other arts. Actually, we have a lot of dependency to some of that. So I said some of the hardware arts that are supplying the hardware to make sure that hardware gives us the data that we can collect, and then we have a lot of dependencies to kind of the other arts within our solution as well, regards to, for instance, connectivity. So actually getting the data from the car to the cloud. How are we doing that? That's going to be different in each different car platform.
I understand.
So we have a lot of dependencies there. So my role, I kind of see my role as more, to a sporting analogy, is more like a sporting director. So someone's in charge of the long-term goal of the team, regards to where we should be placing our resources, whether we should be focusing on the cup or the league, whether we should be focusing on financial security for a year, and then the POs themselves, and especially the POs are more along the lines of kind of the coaches actually getting the teams up and running. So that's I have a longer term view.
So in general, there is a big backlog.
Yes.
At some time, you have a certain capacity to do work, and you need to prioritize and actually say no to things.
Yeah.
And what is the climate there? Is that, can you talk a little bit? How do you navigate as a product manager? What we should do and what you should wait with, and which stakeholder you're not saying the yes to. So how is that game?
Yeah, I mean that's essentially a large part of what we do. Is hopefully not saying no, but trying to understand when requirements are coming in, or requests for data, or for work, or for new data. Understanding when that needs to be realised. Understanding whether we can reuse an existing solution, or whether we have to build something new. Yeah. And then understanding what dependencies we have. Is that something we can do easily, or is that something that's going to take a lot of effort? Yeah. And then we have to balance that with everything else. And then obviously we have a solution level above us that I can then get support for. I can say, okay, well, this is it. I have one team that's capable of doing this task, and they only have so much capacity. Where do we do this? Yeah. This is what we win by doing this task. This is what we win by doing the other task. Where do we see these priorities?
I understand. So you get some input on the priority from the solution level. But I also want to ask you, we talked a little bit briefly about there might be a portfolio level with portfolio management and guiding epics as it is. So, and what is your collaboration with? Are you collaborating with a portfolio?
It is. It's very rarely that you'd have one portfolio coming down to be dependent on one independent delivery from an art, because that would generally be split over multiple capabilities which then would need to be delivered either in sequence or succession in order to deliver that value. So it would be rare that the portfolio level are coming down and speaking to the art. It would be a direct stakeholder with a direct need. And then we have to say, is this something that is purely within our remit to do? Or are we dependent on other people? And as soon as we're dependent on other people, then you have 2 or 3 or 4 arts needing to coordinate to realise something.
And then you can coordinate, and then you have a PI planning. I try to do so.
Yeah, so you need to do the refinement before the PI planning, and then take that for PI planning and say, this is what we're going to do. And that refinement, you talked about which meetings do we have? We have one meeting a week we call the PO sync, where all the POs and the team managers, if they want to, can come in and we can go through stuff that's been lifted that week for things for us to do as an art, or things that we want to push out to other arts as dependencies, and to track those, and then to try and obviously take not just ideas top down, we need to take ideas from teams as well. Teams need to come up with ideas and say, this is what we want to do with our product. How does that fit into the short, medium, or long term of where we're going? Now, hopefully I can give them some guidance over the medium to long term, but they may well come up with something, so we can do this now, and this solves this, or this will enable this to be done easier in the future.
So I'm quite pleased to hear that, because sometimes SAFe is like they say, it's like a waterfall disguised as agile, and everything is top down. But you're saying now that you have some sort of intake process where things actually can come from teams that they see, and they have some empowerment in doing stuff.
You have to have that. I mean, the teams have the best ideas. They're the ones who know their product. They're the ones that know where they want to go with their product. All I can do is basically guide them to make sure that product then delivers the future needs for the organisation. So you have to take those requirements in and see where they best fit to where your organisation wants to go.
Okay, so great. So I wanted to ask you a little bit maybe about tooling. So what kind of tools do you use to support this?
We have Vera to essentially track stories and tasks, features, that kind of thing. And then we use Confluence as a documentation.
So Vera is some sort of Jira Volvo bundle?
I guess it is. It's the Volvo implementation of Jira.
Vera. Okay. And then, so working, remote, I guess you're working with Teams or Slack or what?
We've got Teams, we've got Slack. That's pretty much what we work on. That seems to, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
I think
doing webinars like this,
Yeah, this is nice to have some contact. Contact.
2 meters, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So next question, so you mentioned the IP sprint, and the P is the planning, and the PI planning, the big planning, that's plans for next increment. But the I is innovation.
Yes.
And so I want to ask you, how do you work with innovation?
I'm very for the concept of innovation, and I've tried to push that within the teams that I have, is that I think innovation is key because it brings up new ideas. And one thing I try to get over is that innovation isn't just because you're doing innovative development in your daily work, that isn't necessarily the same thing as innovation.
No.
You may be doing some really cutting edge code, that's still part of the daily development work. Innovation is maybe looking at a new tool set or a new design pattern or a new hardware configuration or something completely different than what you're doing now that may help you in the future.
Yeah.
So it's not just because you're doing innovative development isn't necessarily equal to doing an innovation sprint. So I'm very keen that teams try and leave in PI planning some capacity to do some form of innovation. Yeah. I'm also very keen that teams do that cross-team.
Cross-team, yeah.
So you don't always sit with the same people, so you can work in a virtual team for even a day or a half a day to have a workshop just to do something that's outside of your normal working environment.
So you have actually what you're saying in the IP sprint, you split up the teams and you.
I don't do it deliberately. I mean, if teams want to split up and do something, then they're free to do that. It's completely up to teams to do that. I don't force them, but it's completely up to teams to do that.
So I also want to ask, how do you prepare that innovation? Is it something intrinsic coming from a team, or is it something that you as a product manager see some, cutting edge technology on the horizon that, okay, guys, should we maybe dig into?
It's normally bottom up. We have kind of a tech team within my art that has a number of ideas about technologies that generally I like innovation to be coming from the teams themselves, because they're the ones that, I mean, the innovation generally, the best innovation things I've seen are solutions to daily problems that teams have got. Yeah. So they're the ones who are best suited to know what they're able to do.
And sometimes, the innovation can be seen, okay, the team should do whatever they want, and some manager or something sees that, okay, we need to push, there's a deadline coming up. Yeah. And how do you balance that? You said that you're very keen on innovation, that is good.
I'm very keen on it. The teams themselves are generally very keen on it. The teams themselves normally take a huge amount of pride on their deliveries. Yeah. And they want, if they've committed to something in the start of PI, then they're very keen to deliver that. And that's a whole webinar in itself about what you commit to and how that impacts the concept of agility. But the team themselves are very committed to delivering what they have said they would. Yep. So sometimes you need to encourage the teams to think about this rather than just working straight through. Yep. So I have an RTE who's extremely good at pestering the teams and asking for innovation ideas, and then we try and present those at the iteration review for the PI planning.
So that's very interesting. So when I'm listening to you, I hear behind the lines that the team takes accountability for what they have, planned, and they feel accountable themselves.
Yes.
And if it's so, you have come a very long way. That's a high agile maturity and in getting team really accountable for what they plan. So that's a good, very good.
Yeah, I have a number. All the teams in my art are very proud of what they do and take a lot of pride in saying that they have delivered what they've stated they're going to deliver. That's fantastic.
So I was heading back to your role a little bit about, we had talked about what kind of, a little bit into the teams, and I also want to talk a little bit your collaboration with the product owners. So you have how many product owners in your art?
2, 3, 4, 5.
5?
Yeah.
And you're the only PM?
I'm the only PM, yeah. And then we have, 4, 5, 6, and 8 teams.
8 teams.
Yeah.
5 POs, 1 PM. And
then a tech team. So, yeah.
A tech team. And then you said you have PO sync meetings, and that is you're in there.
That's kind of our intake meeting. Yeah. What do we have that's been given to us that we need to look at? So that's the beginning of kind of the continuous exploration phase. So we might have something new come up there, or it's like, oh, who wants to look at this, or who does this impact? Who has an opinion there? And then we'll have a working meeting outside of that to kind of walk through that to see whether that's something that we want to do. If we do want to do it, where does that lie within the planning? Is that something we need to do now so we can plan for it in the future? And then how does that look at at a feature level?
Yeah, on a feature level. So that is really a team. You as a PM and the PO, you work together a little bit.
We're trying to create that team feeling, Yeah, team
feeling. And then, as you said, you do continuous exploration. And do you work with like benefit hypothesis and,
That's generally not something we've been particularly good at, to be honest. I think that's quite difficult. And it's always, even with kind of the older kind of specification-driven products, getting an idea on return on investment is always quite hard, unless it's a clear business case that you have to migrate away from product X to product B at a certain point, otherwise there'll be a yearly cost. Then it's quite hard to get a return on investment. So the hypothesis theorem is like, well, we think we need to do this, but that's something we need to get better at.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and that leads me to next subject. So I wanted to talk a little bit about DevOps, development and operations. So we're talking, of course, a lot of, what you develop, but then you need, of course, to operate whatever you have built. So you are working DevOps, right?
Yes, we are. Yeah. Majority of teams are in DevOps.
And so having that operations view, do you have part of that or whole of that? What, as a PM, do you look at operations or are you always?
I mean, ultimately, I guess I'm responsible for the products within the portfolio of the art. So in some respects, yes. Now I have the teams that are doing DevOps have stable products. We have monitoring those. We try and always allocate a certain amount of time per PI to kind of DevOps work. But obviously, my goal as a PM is that you have more things in production, but an equal amount of time dedicated to DevOps in them, so the efficiency gain. Because obviously after a while, then if you don't have good code, then you're essentially just DevOpsing the whole time and not developing any code, which is no one wants to be in.
No, of course. So then it's, you're building your technical depth, and that you don't want. So I guess, so as a product manager, because DevOps and operations is a little bit about the non-functional requirements, the scalability, the security, latency and stuff like that. So, and how do you work with that? Is something that, now we do something and then we see how it works and then we try to fix it? Or is it, okay, we need this and it's, I don't know, what maybe regions or, what kind of non-functional requirements are you looking at?
It really depends on which products we have in place. Now, if we have products that are related to kind of streaming data, then we may have like a 1-2 second response time from a car to the cloud, back to the car again. So there we're talking extremely quick response times for the things we can control. So we can't control the 340 network in between, but we control the processing in the cloud, and we can understand through historic trends the peaks in the day or the peaks during the month that we're going to get the highest load. And what we can do, we can look at expected sales figures, for instance, and say, okay, we have this many cars running this system today, and then with the projected sales figures, we can say, okay, well, in a year's time, then we have that many cars if the growth rate is consistent. So at the start of every PI, we can actually run a simulated load test on where we think the product will be in a year's time, and start to see that we can actually scale in a linear sense. There's no memory leaks or there's no tailing off of performance.
Okay. That's cool. So speaking of DevOps, in DevOps you talk about, some KPIs of the continuous delivery pipeline, if you like. That's a word for, when deploying things to different environments and how often you do that. So, continuous delivery is the word here. So how do you work with that? Is it the frequency of it?
Again, that varies by team, that varies by product maturity levels. We can, and in some instances, we can deploy incredibly quickly or automate it through from a laptop build to a test environment build to a QA build, and then push to dev. In some instances, that can be under half an hour for a release.
So half an hour from code commit to production release.
Best case environments.
That's pretty good.
Which is fantastic. In other instances, we may well be reliant on a hardware delivery and external supplier providing us with a patch. In which case, it could be 6 months. So we roll that out into the factory, into the car itself. So it's very much
30 minutes to 6 months.
Yeah,
somewhere there.
Somewhere in between.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah.
So it really depends on the technology. If it's something purely within our own control, our own domain, and it's cloud-based development, then incredibly quickly. And then if it's not, if it's hardware-based, then obviously we're waiting for a much longer period.
So you are working with some cloud-based technology.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's, is it, decoupled architecture and all of the microservices?
We're striving to get there. Some of the products have very good level of decoupled architecture and are running microservices. Microservices, others are less so. But again, we have that as kind of one of the roadmap goals, essentially. This is where we need to go in order to deliver what we need to deliver. We have to have an architecture that allows us to be dynamic, and that means microservices, or that means certainly loose coupling between components.
Yeah. So in safe terms, sometimes you talk about enablers. You have a certain amount of enablers, and then you have business features.
Yeah.
And then you try to a little bit, have a reasonable amount of each. But do you work with some architect on the enablers, or how have you?
Yeah, we have a tech team that is kind of mainly looking at the kind of the medium to long term needs for our art, and then each development team generally has a lead developer who takes an architecture role there as well. So you have both the short term and the medium term covered.
Yeah, but it's pretty decentralized, the architecture.
Trying to get it decentralized. I mean, architecture itself, I think, we can talk about not necessarily Volvo, but safe in general. The architecture role itself is always one that's slightly contentious. How do you enable? How do you create empowered teams if you have central architecture pushing specifications down?
Sitting on the ivory tower.
So there's a really interesting balance there to try and gain. Obviously, we want the team to be as empowered as much and take control and ownership of their products, but that needs to be within a roadmap and in a framework of this is where we're going in 3 or 4 years' time, and these are all the dependencies external to where we are. So there's definitely a balance there, and that's why we have a tech team in order to try and mitigate that and to allow and to basically be involved in some of the discussions that some of the POs and techs don't necessarily want to be involved in, because it's not stuff that's related to this increment or next increment.
Yeah. So you're talking about tech teams there, I detected. Yeah. So what's pretty hot now is team topologies. In SAFE, there's a new concept of a different type of teams. So now obviously you have a tech team, and they are, as you said, a little bit of architecture in there, and some enablement.
Yes.
And then the other teams, are they kind of feature teams that build features, or do you have other, component teams that are very component based?
This is interesting. This is something actually we're looking at the moment. We have essentially product-based teams that take a very kind of siloed end-to-end approach to their product, and we're seeing for again scalability and for the level of decoupled, maybe we need some frameworks that run kind of horizontally.
Yeah.
And how then do you balance a team developing frameworks to developing an end-to-end product, and where should the product end defined be? And that's something we're looking at now, actually, for future car platforms.
Yeah, you're not ready ever. So
that's one of the things with being agile, I guess, is that you're never done. And agile is, I think, one thing to push is it's not just the development process; it's the organization. So the concept of an art is almost transitory. I mean, our art an art may not need to exist in 3 or 4 years' time because it's delivered its value. So the whole concept of being agile is related to the organization, not just the development practices.
I see. A few more questions on the DevOps topic there. So you mentioned a little bit about monitoring. And I like monitoring actually to see. Of course, you have a health monitoring that your product works.
Yeah.
But then if you do good monitoring, you can also have monitor business data, the load and the behaviors of the users and stuff like that. And then it goes back to the benefit hypothesis. Okay, if we do this, I have a hypothesis, and if we do this, and this is going to change in the product, and the customers are going to behave in a different way, and they can measure that. And that is, of course, quite advanced, but do you have any of that?
And that's almost essentially what our art is kind of responsible for doing, is providing that data to the engineers to know how well their individual components are doing. And that can be from kind of where you press on the screen, for instance, to how often a function is used, to how a function works at certain temperatures or speed ranges. So that kind of data, that diagnostic data, that information is, or user data is something that we're...
So you're really providing that.
We provide that. Our task is to provide that. In not all instances can we, but it's building up and building up.
Yeah, cool. So that's monitoring. And also a question I have here is about automation, because really, like Google, Amazon, they have automated all. And I think like in Google, they always have, if you can automate something, that has always the top priority at Google, and then they become very efficient. So how do you work with automation, if you do?
Different things to try to automate as much kind of the build process and the escalation process in one environment to the other. And then you can build in things like dependency tracker or things like that to look and make sure there's no critical bugs in code, and then you can stop the automated build if there are, things like that. So we're working on that, and again, that's a little bit kind of slightly too technical to give you a real solid answer from my knowledge. But something the teams do and are looking at. As always, it's levels of maturity here.
Yeah, cool. So I want to move to some a little bit of reflections from this journey that you have done before we move on to questions here. So what if you can point out a few key learnings or major learnings from work. Previously you worked waterfall, now it's agile. So what have you learned?
I think what we've learned, the learning is that the value comes, as I said before, from the visibility, from the understanding. So if we are going to take in a change, this is the impact it's going to have, and this is where it hits, and this is the consequence of that. And having, that's what Agile is really, I guess, understanding, being able to take in change, understanding what is kicked out because of that. I think that's much more visible now than it was before.
Visibility, transparency. And I also guess that the cadence-based development is something that helps. Yeah,
working without top-down specifications, you're developing quicker, which is one of the keys of doing this, is to be able to get code, to get value quicker, even if that's POC code or real dev code, you're doing something quicker.
Okay. So if you go into SAFE website, you can see why should you do SAFE, and they have you should get business result, and they talk about increased productivity, better time to market, increased quality, and higher engagement. Yeah, the engagement one I think is what I'd pick out of those. To be honest, it's I think they're having teams that are looking after products, that are doing the DevOps, that are taking pride over what they deliver. They have a vested interest in it. They understand the roadmap of where they're going, hopefully, and they can see that, and they're given the opportunity to build upon that. Then that creates a positive atmosphere, I hope. Yeah. So then you have had a culture change, I guess, in order to get that. Yeah, it is a pretty significant culture. As I said before, you've got people that never worked in Agile or brand new recruits that have only ever known Agile. So we have a huge cultural difference, but there has been a shift, a transformation. Yeah, cool. So I also, because that is one of my key questions, so what was most fun? What has been most fun with this? What do you say? What's been most fun? I mean, it's the learning. The learning of doing this. I mean, it's going through the just PI planning 4 years ago or so was hilarious. I'm always going to say it takes the first PI planning, you've got no idea what you're supposed to do. The second PI planning, you've got an idea of what the output should be.
the third PI planning, you've got a pretty good idea what the input should be in order to get the output you want.
Yeah.
And then from the fourth PI planning, which is a year later, if we're doing 12-week increments, is when you start to see the value of that. And then doing that in a big room is brilliant. Unfortunately, now the big room is electronic or Miro. Yeah. So we're not getting everyone in the same room, which I think is a real shame.
Yeah, it's quite hard to be online.
But the fun bit is the learning. It's actually teams kind of understanding where we're going and buying into that process and being positive towards where we're heading.
Yeah, I like that you said the first PI planning, you don't know it. It really takes to the fourth one that you are.
The fourth one, you understand what you're supposed to do before, what you're supposed to do during, and what the output is supposed to be.
I agree. It's my learning as well. All right, thank you. So I had an idea that we should move to questions. Maybe I have a bad eyesight. If we can get a question.
Is VCC implementing SAFe out the box, or does it have a level of Volvo flavour? It does have a level of Volvo flavour. We have some roles within SAFe that roles in Volvo's implementation that isn't necessarily within SAFe.
Yeah.
But it's pretty similar. I mean, it'll be hard pick to find out what was different. But I think there's a couple of roles within the VCAF implementation. So
there's something called VCAF, the Volvo framework, something.
Yeah,
right?
Volvo Cars Agile framework.
Yeah, of course.
I should probably know that.
And there you have some specific roles, and that is related to there are still car projects, right?
There's still car projects. There's still gates to make. There's still things to do there, and there's still we need to have team managers. Are team managers within the SAFe framework? Team managers. So I as a product manager don't have personnel responsibilities.
Okay, yeah, some team leaders.
So I need to take the teams themselves. So that's a role that we have.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important for the recruiting and the personnel development of the teams.
Yeah, cool. So I think, Philip, you pick the questions here. There's two things. That you can pick your own questions, what you like, but I had a hard time to see them. So that's a twofold thing here.
Can you mention some of the pros and cons having the same cadence? Let's just miss that. That screen just jumped.
I think it was pros and cons. Everyone is working with the same cadence for PI planning at the same time. So, and then I guess that people are like, they are at their own PI plannings.
Actually, yes, that's actually an interesting comment. We did the last PI planning, we actually did it on a Tuesday and a Thursday.
Okay.
And on the Wednesday, everyone had free to do dependencies, to look at dependencies to other arts.
Uh-huh.
And we did a Menti survey at the end, and that was really popular, and people thought that was a very good way of doing PI planning. So before, we've always done 2 consecutive days, and teams have been fighting to get time with other arts or other teams to discuss dependencies. And now we're doing it on a day, a rest day, and then a day. So that's an improvement we've had.
Nice.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, let's see what we got more there. So can you see something that attracts you?
There's a hardware question, but I'm a little bit afraid to answer that.
So now we're reading like crazy here. So we have one is about the feature life cycle time that I can see here. So how I guess that is, how big is a feature? Does it always fit an increment, and how big are they generally?
I mean, if you go with the definition, the standard definition of a feature, then it should be developed by one team in one PI, and that isn't always the case. As a PM, I kind of like to do that because I don't like to see part 1 and part 2 of a feature. It'd be nice if we did deliver that inside one PI, but it isn't always the case. I'm not kind of that strict on us keeping that. It's nice to do that. So it's nice to deliver functionality as quickly as we can. And if something's dragging over, if it has the potential to drag over 2 PIs, then it probably will do. So if you can encapsulate that in one, even better.
Yeah. And then, elaborating more on that question, do you try to, you have a, the prioritization function, the weighted shortest job first method, and that says that you should really sequence job and to get some value out?
Yeah, we've looked at that, and I'm not a massive fan of that. I think the teams themselves and the product owners and me as a PM kind of, you have an intrinsic understanding about what needs to be done, and I think the Wall Street Journal approach, as we refer to it, is probably not.
The Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is not the approach that we take there.
Yeah. So, but how do you prioritize then? So it's something
we prioritize by sitting with the teams, understanding what they see as priorities, what we see as stakeholder has priorities, where they are regarding deliveries to external dependencies, deliveries to products themselves, and so it's a balance.
Do you have like a meeting right before the PI planning to actually figure out which features will?
I generally have a very good idea of which features that the PIs are going to have in the PI, and we can generally work out. We have backlogs that are relatively big, so it's always a general discussion beforehand with me as a PM. What are the art priorities? What are solution priorities? And make sure we're not doing something completely radical that doesn't fit.
All right, so let's see if we can pick up some more. I need to go forward a little bit there. So what can we take here?
Is there any more structured tool support for handling of art team interdependencies, or is it handled in meetings and discussions? We have, we generally use Jira we use Confidence to create risks and dependencies and stuff that we push to other arts or stuff that we've received from other arts, and then they're generally related to features that we then break down. So it's again trying to work within the Vera tool itself, or Jira tool, sorry.
The Vera Jira.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe let's see the clock. We have time for...
Do you have a solution roadmap, solution backlog? How do you interact with solution generate, and how often? Good question.
Yeah.
We have a solution backlog refinement meeting once a week where all the PMs in the art sit together and just work through stuff that's come up. We're starting to get to the point where we made a conscious decision to, as you refer to, burn the PowerPoint last PI and try and create the solution roadmap from the features in Jira.
Right. Are you working with advanced roadmaps in Jira or something like that?
No, we're not really. We're just trying to tag which features or ethics are kind of solution level that need to be shown on a solution level, and then try and then generate a solution roadmap in Confluence.
I'm glad to hear that you burnt PowerPoints.
Yeah, I'm a big
nice.
fan of burning PowerPoints because I create enough of them. So yeah, we're trying to do that via the tool support, which I think is a really positive step.
Yeah. All right. Shall we have one last question?
How is infrastructure and ops planned during the PI? Well, we have an art that is responsible for the cloud environment, so they take in a lot of the kind of the standard cloud ops work. But I think when we're talking about DevOps of teams, then we, as I said before, we want to try and allocate a percentage of time to DevOps, and that depends how many things they have in ops now and how mature they are.
Yeah.
So we have some teams that have a very little, next to no time for DevOps because they have a product that's stable and it runs, and they just have to monitor it. And we have other areas that are migrating from an older platform, for instance, or that's no longer supported. So they'll need to spend more time in a PI to do that. So it varies a bit, but ideally you want to have a set amount of DevOps time allocated. And if you don't use that, you can then teams and sales can then lift improvement stories from their own backlog.
Yeah, improvement stories. That's good. That's good. All right, Philip. So we have spent an hour almost on this, talking agile and safe, and that was the idea to do that. And so I can see that there are more questions. We cannot answer them all, but we answered a few. So a big thank to you. So actually, we have something for you here. There's a goodie bag.
Thank you.
For you coming here and sharing your insights, your work as a product manager. And I will also say that we have more webinars coming up. We're going to do one on psychological safety later in the spring. Heads up for that. And moreover, is shared in the chat there that we are doing education, and there, if someone of you are interested in working as a product manager or product owner, there's a safe course, and we have one coming up in May there. So you have some code there, so it gets cheaper. I guess 30% off. Incredible, good. So, yeah. So by that, we are finished here, and I hope you had a great time. I did, and as said, we're gonna be back again at some time in person, but maybe some more webinar digital. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.